Hi everyone, as promised, I'm trying to get some tutorials posted here relating to using SketchUp with Twinmotion. And I was going to kind of combine the tutorial about working with topography and creating terrain models along with kind of putting initial design elements in and how to set that up so that it works well when you transition to Twinmotion. But the landforms create kind of a whole set of problems on their own. So I decided to pull this tutorial out separately and just talk about terrain modeling a little bit in SketchUp. I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible. So I've got three scenarios I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to focus mainly on the last one here since the students I'm working with this semester are already starting with base models that were created with Placemaker. It's a great plugin, creates base models really quickly from OpenStreetMap data, but creates a whole bunch of headaches when you try to use it for actually site design. So talk about that, how to kind of work around that with a couple other plugins. But just to start really briefly, if you're not using Placemaker or if you have a set of contours, just to make sure that if you're not using this, that you are aware of it. If you're going to explode this, SketchUp does have its own built-in terrain modeling tools called the sandbox tools, but you do not want to use them. I'm just going to make a copy of this and slide it down over here and leave that selected and just come up to my sandbox tools. This one right here says from contours. So these are 3D contours. I'm just going to click on that and you can see the status bar running across here. There you go. So I just made that terrain model and now I'm going to, we'll come back to that in a second. I'm going to create the second version of that using this set of contours. So I'm going to select those and I'm going to use a plugin called Toposhaper. This is a free plugin. You need to get it. And you'll see the difference in a minute. So it comes up with its own interface. Looks a little daunting, but most of the time it just works pretty straightforward. Occasionally, if you have broken contour lines at steps or walls, it gives you a chance to connect them. It'll show where there's breaks. But if you need to make some adjustments, you can hit update contours and reload. I'm not going to go through all the details of Toposhaper. You can look at the tutorials by the author. So I'm just going to click calculate terrain. And this is actually an alternate method for the final one I'm going to show too for creating a better terrain. You lose the image, but I just created these contours using the contour plugin. It's also a free plugin. I use the Placemaker terrain and I created contours and I generated a new terrain from those contours. So it's kind of a couple steps. But one of the advantages here, as you'll see in a second, this uses a nice square grid that is triangulated across the diagonals, and it just makes much cleaner to work with, and it works great with the Artisan organic modeling tools. Now you can adjust the grid. This is the only setting you should be aware of, really. It has adjustments for whether you want the hilltops flat or slightly curved. You just put in the number. If I increase this to 100, you just do to recalculate, and it's refining that in there. It's based on the overall dimensions of the site, so it's not really a grid spacing per se, but you can kind of, if you know how big your site is, you can see. And Artisan has tools to allow you to subdivide an area, so you don't really want to have to make this any finer grid than you absolutely need. Really depends on the site. You can see here, actually, my site probably doesn't need all of this, but it's a park, a smaller scale design, so I want to be able to manipulate this a little more refined way. Okay, so I'm going to accept that, just say generate terrain. It goes through the final calculation. When you're done, you just click outside, and then I can delete those contours out of there. So the main difference, they look about the same, but we delete these, well, I'm going to leave those contours in so you can see them. But when I turn on the hidden geometry, that's when the difference. You can see this is a nice uniform quad mesh that is super easy to edit, easy to drape things onto, and this is just simply a disaster of complexity. It just, if you're draping objects and lines across this, sometimes it doesn't close them. It's got so many more intersections. It's going to take a lot longer to do. This really is not very useful. So I never use the sandbox tools to create terrain, and Toposhaper is free, so use it. Now, the option I'm going to focus on now, once we get in there, I have a couple things here. You know, you can take your, if you have your hard surfaces, anything that's going to be on the ground plane itself. These happen to be the roads, and this is the park area itself. You can use a sandbox tool like the drape tool. That's one that works fine, and it will drape that down on the site. And hopefully, if it worked like it should have, I can go in there and recolor that. And then I can come back in and add my overall site shapes to that. Again, select it, choose the drape tool, and it can be inside a group, it's fine. You get in there. So basically I'm getting this to the point where I can separate that site off. And then if you want to work with this and you have your design elements already here, I could drape these down onto that terrain, or I could turn them into shapes. I'm not going to demonstrate that on this one. You'll see that technique as I move through here. So anyway, if you're working with contours, get Toposhaper, use it, it's great, and you'll see the benefit of that in a minute when I start using Artisan. Okay, so let's talk about Placemaker. Great plugin, as I said, but it does create some problems. It brings in this terrain. One of the things, if you want the terrain, it also can apply high resolution aerial photography to it using a couple sources, one of which is Nearmap, which is really great. But if you want terrain, before you use the Placemaker plugin, you need to come up here and use the built-in SketchUp location, geolocation tool. And if you click on that, this will give you a map. You can select the area. You can see here it's in Pittsburgh in the Strip District, and then you click select a region and focus in on what you want and take the snapshot. That's the only way to bring in the 3D terrain. Right now, Placemaker will bring in the buildings, the trees, waterways, paths, roads, and a surface with aerial photography, but it won't bring in the height map data. So if you start here and then select this and click on Placemaker, then you can add the photography, and it will place the trees on here if you want to place the buildings on the terrain. Again, this isn't a tutorial on Placemaker. I'm just going to talk about, okay, once you've created this site with Placemaker, how do you deal with it? Because one of the things that's different about Placemaker is that, if I open this up a little bit, again, turn my hidden geometry on, it does use a quad mesh, which is nice, but it's a fixed size. You can't change the resolution of that. You'll also notice that it kind of goes across at this diagonal here. And the other thing that you can't see is, if I switch to solid mode, is the fact that because of SketchUp's inherent limitations in terms of the bitmap size, it has to, in order to put high resolution photography across a large area, it creates a tile system, as you can see here. And each tile has an image applied if that's the maximum size SketchUp can handle. And then it stitches them together. I'm not sure how they do it behind the scenes, but what I do know is what you end up with is not only the hidden lines that represent the terrain, but you also have hidden lines that represent the edges of these tiles. And these edges are not only softened, but they're hidden. So if you want to take them back out so you can separate pieces, you have to go through 2 steps. Because they're hidden and softened, if you're working over them, they get connected to everything. And even the edges, if you want to draw across this map and connect, you've got to unsoften and unhide all the edges, because otherwise you can't connect to them. The inference tools don't work. And you can see here, I trace this. There's actually a 2-dimensional version of this that they provide with the high-res imagery, but I use that to trace over the outlines. It's one of the things that's actually really nice about it. I mean, it's great to use, but even with it as a group, these lines end up getting connected to everything. Now I can open this up and come in here and delete these out because they're not, this is a planar surface. It doesn't need to be broken up into pieces. It just, they really complicate things. And since SketchUp, hidden geometry in SketchUp isn't separated from anything, it can connect unless it's in a group. And even though this was in a group, it still connects to it. So I haven't figured out exactly how all that works, but all I know is that it's really a pain to work with if you're using this underlying Placemaker terrain. So you can, if you just want to use it, if you're going to use Placemaker and you don't want to take any more steps from this point on, then you know, you can do that. You can take this and do the same process, just drape it down on there. And maybe I'll take this one, drape that on there. And hopefully that separated these things out. Yeah, it looks pretty good. And then what I would do is, since you're not going to really be manipulating that terrain very much, you could go in and, if this is my design layout, I could take these elements and I have a plugin called DropGC. It's going to drop it down to there first. Do it again. Okay, so now I've got these drop down on that surface, but I'm still outside the group, so I'm going to, well, I guess I could still stay outside the group to do this. That maybe makes more sense. And I can just go in manually with the move tool, hit the up arrow. SketchUp likes to do that too. Okay, take each one of these at a time, which is probably a better idea anyway. And then I can move those and kind of position them into place. Just using the move tool, tapping up arrow. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know why SketchUp does this sometimes either. It just, you can't actually move things up and down. Now, if I get inside this group and select it all and choose move, come down to maybe here, tap, it'll let me drop it right down in there. Been wrestling with that for a long time. I have no idea why it does it. But anyway, you can see what I'm doing here. I'm kind of moving these things down into place. And if I moved everyone down into place, and it was not working either. All right, tell you what. Since this other object is grouped anyway, I'm just going to take all these and explode them. And once they get exploded, then I can select them. So I'm just triple clipping, quadruple clicking on them, and zoom in, grab a point, drop it down. And you can kind of see where maybe you need a retaining wall or something like that in there. But as long as these are all intersecting at some level, then I can also come back in here and select. Well, let's try this. Select all these surfaces. And maybe just recolor that one. So now I've got that paving area colored with one pattern, and then the planting beds that are sitting up there. So I would just, if you can do it, now obviously this is a relatively flat site. I'm sitting up here, I can come in here and get my push-pull tool and pull that back down. At some point, some of this geometry is going to get connected, but if this is the final design and I've got it in place, then now I can add other components, which I'll talk about in the next tutorial, and then prep that to take it out into Twinmotion and adjust materials. And since these are all 2D, if I really want to come in here and put curves in or something like that, should be able to grab that, offset that 6 inches. And I can still, if you really wanted to manipulate this as landform, then within these new shapes, I can take this and make it a group, open it up, double click on it, shift click to get rid of that, and use the soap skin bubble plugin. I like to use maybe 20 or 30. So I'm just, this is a free plugin also. It's called Soap Skin Bubble. You select a series of connected lines, you click on it, and it puts a mesh in between those lines. So the first time it gives you a preview, you can type in how many meshes you want, and then once you get it the way you want it, just hit enter again, and it will go through the calculations. When you're done, I still have that, go back and choose my selection tool, still have the original surface in there. So if you can select it, fine. If not, cut this out of here, select it, delete that and just do paste in place. So now I've got this grouped mesh object, and I can use my Artisan tools, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, but this is a Artisan plugin, and I can come in here, oops, and shape this landform. And if you really want to be careful about it, you can go and increase the edges. I'll demonstrate that in a little bit, but that way I can come in here and just really quickly manipulate the terrain. It's a separate group. I can apply a different texture to it, so I can separate the planting bed from the curb area if I want. And now I start getting this, and I can smooth that off to get rid of lines. Again, I'll spend a little more time with Artisan later on, but that's kind of a quick way. If I'm working with, if I'm just working with a Placemaker terrain, I really don't want to try and mess around with manipulating it very much. If you want to create at least a curb line on the roads, great free plugin is called the Joint Push-Pull tool. So I'm going to use the vector version of Vector Push-Pull. I click on that, I drag this down, type -6 for 6 inches, hit enter, hit click plus, it goes through and calculates, and now it's kept that terrain image on there, but it's just dropped it down 6 inches. And basically I'm using the option up here for the finishing of push-pull, erase original face, classic push-pull. So it erases original, pulls that face down. If you use the other one, you'll lose the photography that's already mapped onto that surface. So that's the only reason to use that option. So now I can recolor the faces of the curbs if I want, and when I do some eye-level views, it still looks pretty reasonable. Okay, so if you're using just Placemaker, that's the way I would handle it. I wouldn't try to do any overall site manipulation with Artisan, because it's just too hard to work with this terrain the way it's set up. If you bring down new site objects like planting beds, then you can apply the soapskin bubble and actually manipulate that. But I'm not really touching the original landform at all, because it just doesn't really work very well. So to get around that, if you've got Placemaker, but you really want to work with the entire site, there's another plugin that you have to buy, but it's a yearly subscription. I think it's $10 or something. But it allows me to take this Placemaker terrain and reform it into a new terrain that I can work with much easier. So I'm going to do that by selecting that terrain. This plugin is called Instant Terrain. It's by Chuck Valley, Valley Architects. So I go to Instant Terrain, make terrain over objects. And it gives me the option to choose a number of grids or grid spacing. In this case, I'm going to choose grid spacing at 10 feet. And it'll warn me that it's going to generate 16,000 data points. If you've got a reasonable computer, it doesn't actually take that long to calculate. So it's going to go through and take that mesh that has all those angled quad meshes and hidden and softened lines and tile separations and all that stuff, and it's just going to create a single terrain over top of this object. In fact, it's a great plugin if you want to do quick landform studies. You can draw cubes or circles or any kind of geometric primitives and place them together in SketchUp, and you can select all of them and make them a group, and it will just drape a landform over top of it. And then once you get that basic landform, you can use the Artisan tools to smooth it out, manipulate it, and modify it. So it's really a fantastic way to do quick landform studies without having to worry about thinking about contours. You're just really sculpting digital clay that way. So the reason I'm using it here is just, again, to get away from this. Basically, I'm taking the Placemaker terrain and turning it into a mesh like I created with Toposhaper from the original contours. If you don't have the contours, this is a great way to do it. If you have the contours, you can use those. And the other thing I'll show you based on this is once we get that down there, we can split the terrain with the roads and the site boundaries like I did before. But we can also, if we want to be able to manipulate the landform across the entire site area, not just on top of these planting beds like I demonstrated a second ago, we really need to be able to map an image of our site plan on there and then use that image as a way to manipulate the landform. And once we've got it regraded, then we can drape the actual geometry down there and split it into pieces so we can apply different materials to it. So that's the process I'm going to demonstrate as soon as my instant terrain appears. Still thinking about it. And as far as the image format, the one I'm going to bring in is a PNG file, but you use PNG. Unfortunately, well, maybe not unfortunately. Good example. One of the things about Mr. Valley's plugin is it looks at everything that's here. So you can see what it's doing down here. It's starting to look pretty nice, but because I have these other objects up above, I'm going to have to redo that. So I'm just going to take these. I'm going to cut them out of there because even though I have this selected, it's looking down through the entire SketchUp model. And making a terrain over everything that's visible. So you could have turned off the layers, but I figured I'd just cut them out of there temporarily, let it do its thing, and then once it's there done, I'll do a paste in place again, and we'll go through the process of cutting the site boundaries in first, then mapping a site plan image on it. So we have some guidelines. You don't really want to drape the geometry on initially because that splits the terrain mesh up into multiple pieces. And then when you start using the Artisan tool, the lines that aren't hidden kind of end up getting distorted. And also you get a lot of triangulation in the landform because it's been split up along, especially in this case, I'm using a curvilinear form pattern, so it gets a lot of triangulation. By using an image of the site plan, keep the entire site terrain in one piece, I can mold it, shape it, manipulate it any way I want, and then, but I can still see where the sidewalks are, where the planting beds are, and so forth. So I know where it needs to be level, where it needs to be sloped, and it actually is a really quick way to go through and regrade a site without worrying about where the extra geometry is within the model itself. All right, hopefully it'll finish up here in a couple seconds. And as you saw before, it actually kind of ends up dropping itself right in over top of the other terrain. So if I was smart, I would have set a new layer. If you create a new layer and make that the active layer, when it creates this new shape, it will be on that layer so you can turn it off and on. I'm just going to select it and cut it, delete the other one, and paste it back in place. But layer organization becomes pretty important as you're working through this in SketchUp to make sure that you can keep these things separated once they're generated. So they end up in the same 3D space. All right, there we are. So as you can see, it's sitting right there. Now, if I try and click on here, I don't know what I'm getting. So I'm going to click down here, cut that out of there, select this, just delete it, and go back to paste in place. Now, obviously, I'm losing my aerial image for the entire site, but there's no way to keep that on there. It's one of the things I'm actually going to talk to the folks at Placemaker about. It'd be nice to have a way to map that back on there, even if it's at a lower resolution, just to have it as context information. So what I want to do first is what I'm going to do first is I just deleted all the stuff that I need to use. So let's see if we can manage this one. All right, I'm just going to do it this way. It's not going to be perfect, but I'm not going to redo that. Let's just get it somewhere in there, close enough. These are all lined up. So I'm going to take this object and drape that down. Then I'm going to grab this one and drape that one down as well. Okay, now before I do anything else, I'm just going to explode this just so I don't have to keep going inside the group. Before I do anything else, I'm going to pull in an image, and I'm going to start by mapping that image on this 2D planar surface up here, because if I try to map it on here, it's not going to work very well. What I need to do is a two-step process, well, three-step. I map the image on the surface, then I use the texture position option, and I'm going to stretch it so that it fits perfectly on this two-dimensional surface. Line the corners up so they are all exactly where they're supposed to be. And then once I've done that, then I can convert it into a projected texture, and then I can place it down onto the landform. Otherwise, it will end up being broken, a real kind of faceted image where little pieces of it are scattered all over the triangulations within the landform itself, and that's not going to help me very much. Okay, so I'm just going to use the file and import command. I've got this set to all supported image types. And I've got my sketch plan here, and I'm going to zoom in here and just drop it right on this surface. I don't really care where it ends up initially. I'm going to do texture, position, and I can start by kind of moving it into the center here. Now, usually when you come up, you're going to see these 4 pins. These are the fixed pin options. I could just keep scaling this with the green pen and moving it and trying trial and error, but there's a lot quicker way to do it. If you uncheck this and go to floating pins, I can take this one and put it right on that corner. I can grab this one, put it right on that corner. Let's take this one and put it on that corner, and this one, and put it on that corner. Okay, now once I've got that set, I can click and drag this to the corresponding geometry. So there's that corner, there's that one, there's that one, there is that one. All right, so actually I can't really see it because I'm inside the group. Okay, so I'm going to do done. And now you can see that lined up pretty nicely. But if I try to put this down the way it is now, it's going to look horrible. So what I need to do is right click on it, go to texture and choose projected. And now I'm going to get my paint bucket tool and hold the Alt key down and pick that up. Click that on there, and now you can see that's perfectly lined up. And if I turn my hidden geometry on now, you can see that I've got this nice mesh, nice even mesh, fine enough for me to do the grading that I need to do. And I have my image on there, so now I can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to turn the hidden geometry off for a second, and I'm going to select this entire area, go to Tools, Artisan, and choose Crease Selection. Now what this does is I want to regrade the site internally, but I don't want to move the edges of the sidewalk or the alley back here. I want all those edges to stay exactly where they are, otherwise they'll separate from the rest of the terrain. So to do that, the crease function basically holds those boundaries down, and I have to do it 2 times, one for the edges and one for the vertices. So that makes sure the edges don't move back and forth and the vertices don't move up and down. So I'll start with edges, say okay. Okay, maybe I need to turn on my hidden geometry to do this. Okay, I'm going to do that. Turn this on. Oh, I think I have to have all those vertices selected. And so I'm going to double click, right click, and make this a group. Now I can come inside here and turn the hidden geometry on and just do a select all without selecting all this other grid out here, which I don't want to crease. So let's go back up to Tools, Artisan, Crease Selection, Bounding Edges. There we go, 137. Tools, Artisan, Crease Selection, and now we're going to do Bounding Vertices. Click OK. There we are. So now that we've got that done, I can start coming in here and saying, okay, well, how do I want to grade this? You can see the site slopes a little bit from left to right. I could start by just saying, well, this park design is just a quick design, and this area is across on Liberty Ave, across from the Pittsburgh Ballet Theater, and we used this as a project a couple years ago. And so this one was going to be a theme, kind of a performance-based themes for the theater. There's Pittsburgh Symphony is down the street. There's all kinds of arts in this area. So I thought, well, I need this central area is where a bandstand is going to go, and this is where people can sit and stand. So I maybe want to level this out a little bit. And so I could start by using Artisan's selection tool. and it's the blue one here. Again, the left and right arrows make this bigger and smaller, and I can just come in and kind of come down through here and say, all right, I'm going to make this whole area maybe down to there, to there. Okay, let's just say that. And then I'm going to click Make Planar, X and Y. So it just tilted that enough that it made it perfectly level. So you can see it was kind of subtle. There's still enough room, left enough room for the slope to get back to grade, but this is giving me a nice platform that gives me kind of a level spot to put that stage on. So once I've got that the way I want, I can hit Escape and get rid of that selection. Now I'm going to reduce this size a little bit more. And go back to my painting tool. And again, the up arrow means it's higher intensity, it's lower intensity, and if you go in the negative direction, it means it's going to press down. So if I wanted to create a depressed area, let's go to Sculpt. There we go. I can depress that down. You have several options with the same brush, so you can go to Sculpt or Smooth, Pinch, Flatten. I usually go between Sculpt and Smooth. Let's say if I wanted to depress that for whatever reason, or let's go over here and say I'm going to maybe do some screening on some of these mounds here. Now, if you notice, I think I mentioned before, this has the auto smooth on, and you can see I can kind of come across. If I want that whole area to be up, I can, or I can switch back to smooth and say, you know, maybe I don't really want that. I want to smooth that back out along the edge. I don't want that to be, and you can tell because of the image map that's on there how much it's really going to move around. Again, I can come right across the edge here, and even though I'm getting right near the edge, it's not pulling away. That's because I did the crease function there. Now, if I'm working with this and I realize, you know, I really like in here, maybe I want to change, this is in a planting area in front of the stage, but it's kind of coarse the way I have it, even at 10 feet. So I'm going to go in here and just select these cells, these triangles. And I'm going to click on this box here that says Subdivide Selection. Okay, so it gets rid of my image there, but it allows me to go in and fine tune it. Now, if I want to be able to see that, I can go back and turn off the hidden geometry. Should be able to Alt click, pick this up, and then just paint it back on there, and then turn the hidden geometry back on. So it temporarily kind of, you lose your texture there, but make sure you get rid of the selection. So now I can come in here if I wanted to pull this all up so it kind of slopes down once the stage goes in there. Get a nice sloping planting area that comes up from the stage area itself. And again, it's a smooth tool. You can go in there and, you know, pretty nicely just blend that in a little bit. So this gives you a really quick, fluid way to make those kind of landform adjustments and changes by using the image as a guide, as opposed to having geometry that's breaking this into pieces. And again, I'm not worried about this because I'm going to have a stage sitting there. Okay, so that's kind of a real quick introduction. Again, I'm not going to go through all the features of Artisan, but it's a great plugin. It's super for doing grading, and it gives you a really quick way to go in and make those changes. And then after we've got this done, then if I wanted to, I could come up here and say, okay, I've got these different landforms. Now I could use my drape tool, come in over top of this, click on that. And now I've kind of separated. Now I can apply a whoopsies, paving texture in there. looks like I didn't get my front edges here. So anyway, you're just going to make sure this one you can see that I've got that separated. This one did not connect. I only see one line here, so the rest of this isn't connected. But for this tutorial, I'm not going to go through and troubleshoot that, just to say that that's, oh, they're not in here. That's why. I don't have them. So this is going to connect to there. If you have any issues with it not separating the geometry out, then you can go through and turn your hidden geometry on. And I've done this a couple times, and I'm pretty sure it's over here where this little guy meets the edge or something. Usually has something to do with an arc. Here we go. So now that's separated from from the rest of the model. And if I had the rest of this geometry in here, I could separate that the same. So that's how I would approach it. If you're working with Placemaker, particularly for the students that I'm working with this semester, you can just create this new terrain. And if it's all based on the same original Placemaker terrain, I deleted the one I had here, but I could cut out the same hole. I can take this shape and just cut it. Well, I kind of have it over here, right? I can't really get this very well. Too many pieces in there. But I could take that same model, that same piece, go back to my original Placemaker model, and if it's lined up, I should be able to drop that right into the site, so I can have that aerial photography all the way around and still have the site modeled in the center there. And this is still part of my old stuff, so that's why that's sticking up. But you can see that kind of fits in there pretty nicely if you get it snapped in place. All right, so hopefully that'll help. If you have specific questions about that, let me know. But that's kind of the three options you have when you're working with the topography.